Hello students, today we will go to the fourth part of our series on styles and movements. So while I was preparing this, a question came in my heart. Why do we need to study about styles and movements? In fact, I should have answered this question earlier. Why classify buildings into various styles and movements? I should have brought it to you earlier, but since it came to me now to give you the reason why we need to study styles and movements, let's go through that. It helps us to classify, its classification serves as a tool for critical thinking. For example, because of classifying buildings into various styles and movements like late modernism, postmodernism, or even earlier art deco, art nouveau, etc., we are able to place buildings within a particular historical, cultural and technological context. Number two, it enables us to have a very fine nuanced analysis of the design decisions that were then made by the architects. We are able to understand why those decisions were made, because we know chronologically the time period, we know the forces driving the architects at the time, or the problems they were confronting, and what was the reason for those design decisions. Then it reveals ideological shifts. For example, when we move from modernism to what I will be teaching you next, postmodernism, what is the reason for this shift? It also encourages theoretical depth and scholarly debate. So it is very important for us as architects and students of architecture, as architectural scholars, that we should know something deeper than the layperson. We should know something deeper about the buildings that are around us. Recently, I was having a conversation in which this question came up, that when we design buildings with that theoretical depth and understanding, then our whole approach of designing a building or putting it in an urban scape is different from if those things or values or those decisions, those aspects were not considered. So that kind of theoretical depth and scholarly debate informs the kind of design that you will come up with. It also supports comparison, critique and architectural historiography. That is how history of architecture is being written, has been written and is understood. Second is classification as frameworks for design and teaching. Both as a teacher and you as a design student or a designer, it provides us the conceptual vocabulary in our design studios. That, for example, if you know the styles and movements, if you know, for example, art deco, and I want you to discuss or present a building in that particular style, then I don't have to give you a detailed description. I simply say the word art deco and you get a general idea that is like machine-like ornamentation, a sense of a ship-like forms and curved balconies. So those features start coming to your mind. When I talk of art nouveau, immediately biomorphic, zoomorphic ornamentation, naturally derived ornamentation comes to our mind. When we talk now of late modernism, then the aspects of the white aesthetic, the aspects of industrial aesthetic, etc. So we are able to place or picturize the building in our studio once we are aware of the conceptual vocabulary, or it gives us the conceptual vocabulary. It guides students in navigating architectural patterns, that or precedents you can call them, like what happened when and how the trends are changing. It helps position our own design intention within the ongoing discourse of architecture around us. Like what is my intent, and so many other aspects are being considered, styles and movements are being talked about, people are theoretically giving their arguments for one versus the other. What is my design intent or objective in that? To support interdisciplinary linkages. Many times these movements are not standalone in architecture, they are also connected with art. In some ways they have a connection with technology and overall philosophy. So we are able to link these different strands together, and then to encourage designers or design students to thoughtfully combine their ideas based on the various styles and movements they have studied, or even to challenge these established norms through their work. So you can even challenge them, you can even say that you want to go above and beyond what has been put forward through these styles and movements. So Ultimately, if I were to speak in a nutshell why we need to understand styles and movements, it is to be able to understand the theoretical depth of design language that has gone on over the past, let's say, 200 years or maybe even earlier, so that we can understand how buildings have got transformed. And then knowing that vocabulary, we are much more better informed in designing our buildings. So just to summarize, last time we were seeing the first part of late modernism, where we had looked at a few of the subsets of late modernism, one being sculptural expressionism, expressing the building in the form of a sculpture, as you see here in the TW terminal, that is based or expresses the form of the golden eagle. So one thing I would also like to point out here, that when you remember these various subsets of these movements and styles, you just need to remember as time passes by few key points about it in order to be able to understand and place the building in the right context. For example, when we say geometric expressionism, you know it is an expression of a building through geometry, through, in this case, Louis Kahn in the Sher-e-Bangla assembly using pure triangles and pure circular cutouts, etc. So wherever the building is expressed through geometric expression, that is under this category, also keeping in mind that the fundamental principles of modernism continue. That means the facades are plain, unornamented, though they can be much more radical than before. There is a lot of rational and thinking behind the building design. The principles that were there in modernism continue to be applied here. And then the white aesthetic. So here you know how things have evolved. We had compared this, the Athenaeum designed by Richard Meyer, with the Villa Savoy, where Villa Savoy, also being a white aesthetic, was a much more simple cuboidal volume, but Athenaeum is much more radical, abstract and asymmetrical. Now today we come to the further subsets of late modernism, this one being from Bauhaus. What did we gain from Bauhaus and has been intensified under late modernism? Bauhaus itself falls within modernism. How does it get intensified now? So what we get from Bauhaus is the glass curtain wall with the frame structure which is taken inside. Here I am not talking about the overall planning and organization of Bauhaus, we will talk about that later in another aspect, but I am talking about the design of the workshop wing having a glass curtain wall and the frame structure has been taken inside. So when we come to a late modern John Fitzgerald Kennedy library by I.M. Pye in 1979, we find it also has a steel frame and a glass curtain wall. It is a direct inheritor of the international style Bauhaus. The structure has been taken inside just as done in Bauhaus, but the curtain wall here becomes monumental on a tremendously massive scale, and it is made of dark glass and it is reflective glass. Again, there are pure geometries in this project, a glass cube pavilion and a stark contrast with the white concrete walls, and thus we say it has got a monumental abstraction. The building is not orthogonal plain geometry that we found in Bauhaus, it is a much more abstract composition and a monumental composition. There is no outward ornamentation or historic reference as it was there in the modernist buildings in Bauhaus. This library continues the modernist tradition of internalizing the structure, but it amplifies and monumentalizes the forms, turns them into statements rather than functional solutions. In Bauhaus, the internal structural system was a functional solution to the structural problem. Here it becomes more of a statement, more symbolic. And Charles Jenks also places it in late modernism, an era where modernist features were exaggerated. Then we come to the Javits Center in New York by I.M. Pye in 1986. Please keep in mind that one of the intents that I have in showing you these projects is so that you can get a large vocabulary of buildings and architects who have done these projects, and you get to see lots of buildings and architects through these presentations, and also the wide geographical spread in which these buildings have been made. So one thing is very interesting that you will see that right now in these years, for example, many of the more iconic buildings you will read they are from Europe, they are from America, but as time will move on, you will find that buildings will start appearing in the Middle East, they will start appearing in Dubai, they will start appearing in China, and even in the global south you will hear of some of the examples to show how diverse contemporary architecture has become. We will come to that later. When we come back to the Javits Center, it continues the Bauhaus legacy, the use of glass and steel, its modular structure, there is complete modularity in it. Just as in the Bauhaus, these units are standardized components brought on site and assembled and modularly assembled. So there is what is called as there is a regularity in the facade, which is one of the conditions of the international style and that of Bauhaus. And there is modular structure, glass and steel, rational form, which is again magnified to this monumental scale in late modernism. Another interesting thing is, if you compare this building with the Crystal Palace, this building, the Javits Center, appears to be a modern evolution of the Crystal Palace itself. And then you compare the Javits Center with the Bauhaus and you see the very fundamental definition of late modernism comes in front of us. Intensifying modernism, taking modernism to a very intense level, and that is what is happening here. This is primarily Bauhaus, fundamentally, foundationally it's Bauhaus, the same kind of glass curtain wall with structure inside. But here the overall, if this is the very sedate and simple glass curtain walling in the Bauhaus, you see how massive and how complex the steel and glass structure has become in the Javits Center. Then we come to the Garden Grove Community Church in California by Philip Johnson and Burgee Architects, 1976 to 80, continues the Bauhaus principle, again the steel truss system, modular frame, industrial materials, but a monumental scale versus the Bauhaus human scale. This is again an example of late modernism, and you want to see the scale, look at the scale. This is how amazing the scale of the interior is. This entire glass and steel structure mounted over the church is monumental, all glass skin enclosing the steel frame. And then the second part, we come to the subset of the ones we have seen. Now the second part for today, there are at least three that we saw last time. We have seen the impact through Bauhaus. Now we come to a point called slick tech. Slick tech is an architectural expression that was mentioned by Charles Jenks, and it emphasizes technological refinement, smooth, well polished surfaces and a highly engineered aesthetic. So classic example, the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles by John Portman and Associates. Here you find this very sleek glass facade, highly polished smooth surface, and it is a polished and sleek aesthetic. So the key features are polished and sleek aesthetic. The buildings are clean, smooth, almost machine made, and often the materials used are reflective glass, polished metal and synthetic panels. It also has a corporate expression, generally used for corporate buildings, in this case big hotel buildings and with some multi-purpose parts. And here architecture serves large institutions, especially corporations and financial centers, and the projects convey a sense of power, order and control. Third aspect to it is technological emphasis. there is an emphasis on technology and trying to make technology to be a part of the design. Now this is a very important point, because later on in high tech architecture this point will literally explode, when all the equipment and machines etc. which are there in the building would be on display on the outside of the building. Here this technological emphasis is, it's functionally advanced and it visually showcases technology. For example, you see these elevators which are running through the atrium of the hotel and they are clearly visible. I am reminded of Antonio Saint Alia's definition also, that elevators will not be hidden, they will run like serpents on the walls of the buildings, and it is happening. So these elevators or structural systems, the HVAC, they are all integrated stylishly into the building and they become a part of the design scheme. Tech is a design language, tech is used as an aesthetic of the building, and so the features, the tech features are not hidden, but they are made a part of the overall design language of the building. The fourth point is a formal restraint with high precision, like for example in the Bank of China building by IMPI in 1985. The geometry here is very strict and refined, the facade is very tight, very taut and grid like, and it is based on the original modernist discipline, but there is advanced materiality. The way the materials have been put together and used together in these buildings have changed dramatically in late modernism as compared to modernism. Then in slick tech, let us look at the Renaissance Center in Detroit, again by John Portman and Associates. It's got this very polished and sleek aesthetic. It's got mirror glass curtain walls that you see on the facade and they reflect the sky and the surroundings with a polished look. Sleek glass volumes, smooth continuous forms, a very controlled visual language in which there is a technological uniformity and sleekness about the entire building. Now as part of the corporate expression, this building was commissioned by the Ford Motor Company. It is a mixed use mega structure which has got offices, hotel and retail areas. All of it is self-contained in this urban complex and it has the scale and ambition of a large corporation. It is also a self-sufficient mega structure. That means the complex has got office towers, luxury hotel, retail spaces, restaurants, parking decks all within it. And very interestingly, you see in the hotel that the cars are on display to represent the Detroit car industry and to show modern technology to make the building feel like a sleek high-tech showroom. So that intent is also being followed here. Then we come to one of the buildings that is considered to be the most, a textbook example of slick tech in late modernism, and that is the Willis, Faber and Dumas building by Norman Foster in 1970-75 in England. It has got technological elegance with precision, that is a curved glass curtain wall which is completely encasing or going around an irregular site around the building with seamless precision. The glasses are put together without any transoms and mullions, and so we have modern materials and very high tech detailing. Today having such glass is very common for us to see, for example in airports, but in 1975 it was a unique thing to do to bring such sleekness in the glass facade. So the building reflects the surrounding in the daytime and the building reveals itself, the inside of it, in the night time. It has got corporate modernism. That means there is corporate efficiency and sophistication in the way the building has been put together on the inside without any ornamentation. It has got a very structural expression which is hidden in the smooth form. It has got an advanced internal structure with an open plan with suspended services, but the technology is very subtly integrated into the building and thus the exterior appears smooth and modern. You can see the structural frame here. This entire frame is the structural roof of the building, and so very subtly the structure, the advanced internal structure has been taken care of in the building. If you look at the glass curtain wall and you want to compare with modernism, then Bauhaus glass curtain wall was this one, having smaller glass panels with transoms and mullions, and this is that of the Willis, Faber and Dumas without any intervening members, continuous glass, only the fins are here, and it continuous glass stretches along the wall. Then we come to the Hyatt Regency O'Hare Hotel in Chicago, again by John Portman Associates, and repeatedly we are seeing that John Portman, they are designing hotels for the Hyatt Regency chain. So again, as the other hotels have designed, this hotel also has a massive atrium. The common design concepts and features of the hotels designed by them are evident in these Hyatt Regency hotels, because there is a standardized design language probably desired by the client, that is the Hyatt Regency chain, and for them John Portman Associates designed the atriums of these hotels one more unique or stand out than the other. These are some of the examples of the atriums, and the atriums became so iconic, these dramatic atriums, that they literally redefined hotel architecture in the late 20th century, and a new typology came up called atrium hotels, which is a spectacle. It is also meant for circulation and also meant for corporate hospitality. So these atriums were one of the iconic hallmarks of the Hyatt Regency hotels designed by John Portman and Associates. This is the one Hyatt Regency hotel in Dallas, which is designed by Welton Beckett and Associates. But it is difficult sometimes, looking at the sleek glass facade the hotels have, to know which architect designed which of the Hyatt Regency hotels, because all of them are carrying that same very sleek glass, slick tech language in them. This is the same hotel, and you have these walls of glass, literally they are cuboids of glass that have been clubbed together. And then the atrium in the hotel, the Dallas hotel, is also they are in other Hyatt Regencies which are designed by John Portman Associates. This is for the hotel in Dallas. And one interesting thing about the atrium is, as you can see, the scale is massive. So when you step into this kind of space, you lose the sense of the human scale. But what hotels do when they design these atriums, what architects do is that they provide these spaces at the level, at the floor level, which are on a human scale, so that the whole monumental space gets divided into smaller spaces and thus becomes more suitable for human function or human use. Then we have buildings like the John Hancock Place by IMPI in Boston, having a very sleek glass 60-story office building, just like it's just an example of many such sleek glass buildings that came up during that time. Each bay of each floor is a single pane of glass. There are minimum mullions in the building. The plan in fact is a parallelogram, and the reflective glass is tinted blue. Then later on in the 21st century, 2013, we have the One World Trade Center, which also has a sleek glass facade, but it is not historically a part of late modernism. What we can say is it has got a late modernist DNA. That means the original idea or concepts used in late modernism are being applied here at a contemporary level, and this is a contemporary corporate architecture with a very sleek glass facade. Then we have the Louis Vuitton Hennessy Tower, and this is in New York. Here the glass is being made specially for the facades, and it alternates between transparent and translucent glass. The translucent white glass you see on the outside, the outer curtain wall, which allows diffuse daylight to enter. Then on the inside, there is an inner transparent glass layer which lets the diffuse light go into the building, but the effect is it's a filtered luminous effect. So the daylight comes into the translucent glass and it gets diffused, then passes through the transparent glass to give that luminous effect within the building. Now moving on from slick tech architecture with sleek glass facades and precision in the facades, etc., let's come to one aspect that will then carry us towards high tech architecture, and that is industrial or machine aesthetic. This is the Sony Tower in Osaka, Japan by Kisho Kurokawa in 1976, and in some part there is a part of metabolism also, though we may discuss it later. These capsules that you see, these are the toilet units that have been implanted into the building. They were also assembled or manufactured off site, brought on site and plugged in, something that would belong to metabolism, but we will come back to this later. Now for industrial machine aesthetic was for more anonymous buildings and occasional corporate headquarters, adopting a silver abstraction or industrial aesthetic. I will tell you what it means. It means basically when you look at all the appliances around you today, you find that so many of them are silver in color. It could be your laptop, it could be your phone, it could be your tablet, it could be your refrigerator, your washing machine. It is generally composed of either a silver color, or it can have grey tone, or it can have white. So generally the appliances we use follow this kind of color palette. Then again, this industrial aesthetic also has buildings which have neutral grid. The structure and equipment become the ornament of the building, and the buildings reflect a promise of the future. When you look at them, you are reminded of what is to come in the future. So in these buildings there is use of metals in facade, and now most metals are either natural grey or silver finish. The word silver abstraction refers to the silver finish we find in the metals, and they play a large role in determining this industrial or machine style. The neutrality of silver or grey aesthetic is essential for teamwork design. I will explain that. See, what they think, what is their concept about designing these buildings is that many designers are going to simultaneously work on smaller components of the building, and then the final form is not yet aesthetically predetermined. There is only one thing, the neutrality of silver being a welcome background. This basically means is that all the small teams come to a common consensus that we will be working with a silver palette, or we will be working with a neutral grey palette, or we will be working with a steel finished palette. So when they decide on that and they all work together separately on different components of building, the form not being predetermined, when they bring these different parts and assemble them together, the built form comes up. It seems unified because all the palette is the same. The entire palette of which each team has used is the same palette, so they all harmonize together. Now when I spell it out like this, it seems very simple, but it is not so simple. There are many more complicated design steps required to put together a building like this. Also, these buildings are compatible with industrial components. By this time, industrial components or appliances that we use in our homes had started having tremendously good aesthetic quality. When I refer to you of a company's product, you are attracted to that product because of its tremendous aesthetic quality. When I say an Apple laptop, when I say a particular brand phone, when I say a particular brand television, the aesthetic quality of the industrial product plays a very important role. Now when they said that they are designing buildings with the machine or industrial aesthetic, they are trying to make it compatible with office equipment in corporate buildings, or if it's houses, then the household appliances. But because we are focusing on corporate buildings, we will restrict ourselves to making it compatible to office equipment. Now you see this office equipment in front of you. Most of it has a grey tone or a grey palette. In some cases black and in some cases silver. So the second aspect of it, one aspect of it is its engineering work that is done through teamwork, having come to a consensus on the color palette that we will work with. The second part is the building is considered to be a machine, a concept suitable for the industrial age. And here is where the second aspect we learn from Bauhaus comes in front of us. The first one was when I talked to you about the JFK library, that the Bauhaus curtain wall skin with the structure taken inside was the principle used in many of those buildings, albeit on a monumental scale. Now here in the Bauhaus design, it is like a machine where many parts are distinct yet they are working together. Something I taught you earlier, all are put together to work together and they are all interdependent. Corbusier also came up with a similar concept when he said a house is a machine for living in. This entire concept of interdependent parts working together is the concept of a machine. So they started looking at the building again as a machine, or having a machine aesthetic became important for them. Something that had already been talked about by a modernist or an international style architect like Le Corbusier. Hence, even in the international style, the buildings had become industrial. The emphasis was on rational, functional buildings having no component without purpose, even evident in the city planning of Chandigarh by Corbusier, who evolved his concept of a machine from a villa to a mass housing project like United Habitation, ultimately to the design or planning of a city like Chandigarh. Now, this industrial or machine aesthetic, as you see here in one of the most iconic buildings which define industrial machine aesthetic, is Center Pompidou. Nothing is hidden, everything is expressed. All the ducting, all the AC pipelines, all the electrical lines, all of them are on the outside of the building and they are color coded with primary colors. We will talk about that in detail later. It is an open expression of the process of manufacture, erection and maintenance. There is no hierarchy and composition, but it is a symbol of process and technology. That is how the building has been very clearly seen, how the building has been put together and how the building works. High-tech architecture is not a subset of late modernism, though I am talking about it here because under late modernism we have machine aesthetic, and machine aesthetic is leading us towards high-tech architecture, but high-tech architecture is not a subset of late modernism, it is a parallel and partly overlapping movement that emerged from late modernism in the 1970s and continues even till today. It evolved independently into a distinct architectural language in 1980s and beyond, though it started from the industrial and machine aesthetic concept under late modernism. Richard Rogers said, a building should appear to be assembled from a kit of parts. So, the Lloyds of London literally appears as if it has been assembled from a kit of parts. Now, just to get you an idea of the chronological sequence of these movements, 1920s to 1950s we have modernism, which has got form follows function with architects like Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe and buildings like Villa Savoy and Bauhaus. 1960s to 1980s we have late modernism. It has got abstract geometry and advanced structure, industrial aesthetic, white aesthetic, it has got sculptural and geometric expression. All that is here in these buildings, and we have architects like Richard Meyer, Kenzo Tange and I.M. Pai, and we have buildings like the Glass Pyramid. 1960s to 1990s we have postmodernism, which we will talk about later, which has historical reference. It has got ornamentation with architects like Robert Venturi and Michael Graves, with buildings like Portland building and AT&T building. In 1970s till today, like I said, till today, High-tech continues. It is exposed services, structure as aesthetic, and metallic materials with architects like Renzo Piano, Richard Rogers, and Norman Foster, like buildings like Lloyd's of London and the Centre Pompidou. Now, in high tech, we have Lloyd's of London, but it goes without saying that this building also has machine aesthetic. When I say high tech, I am not neglecting the fact that it displays, or it is a sense of a machine or industrial aesthetic. Better still, the word is factory aesthetic. This has got services in circulation which are obvious and accessible. The building is clad in materials which are evoking the machine age, stainless steel and glass, and the claim here is that if we are going to live with complex technologies, why shouldn't we celebrate the technologies? Why should we let the world know how technologically complex the buildings are and let the technology be displayed on the outside? Now please understand that such kind of buildings with such obvious display of their inner technologies, very few buildings were made like this in this concept in the 70s, and then it moved on to other aspects, and this thing was not widely replicated but only in a few buildings. In late modernism high tech, we have the Millennium Dome in London by Richard Rogers. It is the world's largest dome, and also it was designed for the exhibition that was held to celebrate the arrival of the year 2000 and the coming in of the millennium. That year many of you wouldn't have been born by that time, but for those of us who were around at that time, we know it was a very critical time. Lot of fears were there with regard to a lot of things that might happen, but they did not happen, and the Millennium Dome was built to mark the moment when the year 2000 arrived. So the Millennium Dome has got a translucent structure. It is made of ETFE, or you can simply call it as Teflon. The height of the dome is 50 meters, its circumference is 1 kilometer, and the masts themselves are 100 meters high. It has got an industrial aesthetic, but it falls primarily in the category of high-tech architecture. Now, late modernism carried on to the advanced phase of the industrial age, where architects looked in varying building typologies for their answers. Many were quite unorthodox vis-a-vis the building, but they were fundamentally correct. They were looking at various building typologies which were not actually the buildings they wanted to build, but they found that these typologies gave them the right answers for these buildings. For example, warehouses and factories, when they looked at, gave them the answer for the design of community halls and exhibition halls. For example, the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts, it is a factory aesthetic. So moving on from industrial machine aesthetic, we are now talking about the term factory aesthetic, and it happens in St. Mary's College Athletic Facility by Helmut Jahn in 1977, the appearance of the factory aesthetic. One thing you might have noticed, when modernism and international style were prevalent, there was a lot of uniformity in the buildings. So much of the buildings of a type all looked very much alike. The differences were few, the variety was less. But now when we step into late modernism and parallelly postmodernism, there was a lot more variety in how the buildings looked visually. And this variety has now become huge, colossal in the contemporary times. We will talk about that later. But here we talk about factory aesthetic, where there is a vast column free spaces which were normally there in warehouses and in factories, but it has been applied here to an athletic facility or to the building of community centers and large halls, etc. And similar to the Industrial Revolution, where railway tracks were covered with massive trusses to provide column free spaces. So we have this school in England, which is a strong example of the factory aesthetic, as you can see this hall, and it blends the educational function with an industrial design language. Again, the factory aesthetic we find that late modern spaces turned monumental with large column free spaces like the Bartle Exhibition Hall in Kansas City. This is the Bartle Exhibition Hall by Helmut Jahn, 200,000 square feet of column free space using repetitious triangular trusses. Now similar factory aesthetic in fact did exist in the universal spaces designed by Mies van der Rohe. When you look at the Berlin Art Gallery, when you look at the Crown Hall, when you look at the Alumni Hall, when you look at the Bacardi building, when you look at the Alumni Hall, when you look at the Farnsworth House, these are all universal spaces, and they were also very close to factory aesthetic or industrial aesthetic. In the New National Gallery in Berlin, the works of Mies show that they are foundational for large column free spaces, resulting in global architectural trends. And I pointed out to you that he was a pioneer of the large span space and the long tall span space. So this large spaces, large column free spaces, Mies was a pioneer, and he set these global trends later, when in late modernism the column free spaces became monumental as compared to those done by Mies van der Rohe. The Miesian column free spaces adapted in later buildings like in Sainsbury, which has the same concept of a column free space. But because of the evolution of structural systems, it enabled late modernists to design even larger column free spaces than Mies, and the seminal idea that he had evolved with the advances that took place in the structural system. So we have a much vaster column free space in this building. And in the Bartle Exhibition Hall, which is a part of the Kansas City Convention Center, you find here the example of this huge column free space here. Now when we talk of evolution towards late modernism, we need to go back to some older buildings to understand their impact happening decades later. Large column free spaces using repetitious structural members with vertical circulation, mechanical equipment and services at the perimeter of the building. We find that early example in the Larkin building, where all the services are kept at the perimeter of the building. The staircases, the mechanical equipment, the ventilation system, all on the periphery. And such organization of space is an archetype or a prototype for late modernism. So we find that here, for example, in this large space, I believe it is the Bartle Exhibition Hall. This has got this huge space with all the services etc. on the periphery. The perimeter structural supports and services, and columns have a columns free isotropic center. That means isotropic means having the same physical properties in all directions. The entire space within is column free and it is identical in all directions. It is the Miesian universal space at a monumental scale. The mechanical distribution like air conditioning is housed in flooring or ceiling sandwiches. So we find this principle of services and equipment provided on the periphery in the Larkin building. We find that idea happening in the Bartle Exhibition Hall or even in the Centre Pompidou in Paris, which we will see in more detail. Column free spaces, further comments are that is an exaggeration of the Miesian model. The factory space, architects create interest in these factory spaces which are basically repetitious and monotonous. They do create interest by providing primary colors within the building. So the Jahn's college athletic facility that you see here will have red trusses, blue pipes and yellow ducts. Or even in this athletic facility you see primary blue has been used, or there is a riot of primary colors used in the interior of Pompidou and more so in the exterior of the Pompidou Center. Then came the arrival of the neutral aesthetic also. common to supermarkets, convention centers, warehouses, factories, sports arenas, art galleries and office buildings. Like you find this neutral aesthetic or very dull grey aesthetic or a silver aesthetic as you find in the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts. Here it is, where color is not used. Now again, going back to the Larkin building, many other pioneering concepts came from there. For example, atrium with natural light coming from the top, hermetically sealed building with provision for circulation fresh air, thus laying the ground for central air conditioning to come in the later years, and also steel furniture used in office buildings. Progress in structural engineering, in building technology and in new materials play a vital role in the evolution of architecture in all ages. Such progress happened very rapidly in the 20th century and it has gathered further momentum in the 21st century. Thus, there are many opportunities for architects to design forms like this or this or this that were not possible before. Modern buildings are strengthened with the spirit of the industrial age. Similarly, contemporary buildings, the buildings of today are being molded in the information age. They are intelligent buildings. Other important concepts concerning today's times are the focus on environment, thus green buildings, on energy and even economics. Architecture of this age is also defined by new materials as has happened in previous periods and civilizations also. Thus, we have covered late modernism and its various aspects. In the next presentation, we will start with postmodernism. Thank you.